Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharp. Our headlines this week. Headline number one, former Senator and 2000 Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Joe Lieberman passed away at 82. Lieberman left the Democratic Party while he was in the Senate, almost 2 decades before Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema did the same thing. And in a further display of his independence, he almost became Arizona Senator John McCain's running mate in 2008. Republican John McCain's. Headline number two, Kari Lake put up the white flag in her defamation lawsuit that Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer had filed against her after exhausting almost every remedy to take the lawsuit and throw it out the window. Lake asked the court for a default judgment, which Stephen Richer told me shows that, quote, Kari Lake lied about me, lied to the world, lied to Arizona, lied about the 2022 election. And headline number three, the U.S. Attorney for Arizona said this week that, yay, Arizona's the number one state for threats against election officials, and he thinks 2024's election could make things worse. Which brings me to my guest on this week's AZ Political Podcast, Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, our state's top election official. Mr. Fontes achieved his first elected public office when he won the Maricopa County Recorder's race in 2016 and served 1 4-year term in that office. But he served the public long before that. First as a United States Marine, then as a prosecutor in Denver, Maricopa County, and at the Arizona Attorney General's office. Thanks for being with us here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're leading the country in election threats. That's so great.
Well, we lead the country in a lot of things. That one is the unfortunate one.
Right.
Yeah.
But have you seen the number of threats mellow out over your time as Secretary of State? Did they ramp down since 2022?
Well, I've got a longer view of this because a lot of those threats happen to be aimed at myself and many of them at my own family. And that world of election administrators is very tight. Mm-hmm. So we all know one another. We know what's going on. And now in my office, this has become such a thing that we actually have a threat analyst employed in the Secretary of State's office to watch what is happening and to see what's going on. So we sometimes can see these things ebbing and flowing. It is a sort of a volume thing. They get more and more voluminous and more violent as we approach elections. And when there are headlines pertaining to elections and people start bringing that front of mind, it's as if it is some kind of sick and twisted hobby for some of these people. And it's just pathetic, right? That you are such a sore loser. You're just so gone that the rest of the world doesn't matter to you. You know, that this is something that you got to resort to. Mm-hmm. It's the most un-American and anti-American thing you can do to threaten violence or to commit an act of violence for a political outcome. That's the very definition of terrorism. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is domestic terrorism. So I'm very grateful that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and prosecutors and investigators are ramping up their promotion of their prosecutions. Even though we've got more than anybody else here in Arizona, they're finally starting to talk about them, which I think is great, because hopefully that will act as a deterrent. We can get done with these things and we can get back to the regular work at hand.
By the way, I don't know why anybody would look at these guns. Why would anybody want to mess with you anyway? Right?
Well, I'm not. I don't know.
He looks so different than when we first met. Maybe
I was a little chubbier.
Yeah, well,
back
that
then.
happens.
Yeah.
You know? So, do you think Kari Lake basically giving up on defending against Stephen Richer's lawsuit is going to slow the roll of any of these election stolen conspiracy theorists?
I don't think they see it as a give up, and she's still spewing the same nonsense, even though she basically said and admitted that she lied. Outwardly admitted, yes, I lied. Yes, it was untrue. Now let's go to the penalties. What's the penalty for the lies? I mean, legally, that's where we're at right now.
Right.
Except she's just saying, like on paper, she's saying one thing to the court, and in public, she's saying something else. Here's the bottom line. I think people are making way much ado about nothing. You know, this is a regular lawsuit between two folks. Sure, they're in the public eye, but aren't we just sick and tired of Kari Lake by now and all of that BS? I am. Because we know it's a lie. She's admitted it's a lie, so can we just move on? The penalty phase, it's an interesting, I think, legal thing, and we can get into the details if you want, but I think they're planning on one thing during penalty phase, and I think it's going to backfire on her, and she's going to end up paying a ton of money out of her own pocket hopefully, so that we can get back to some regular politics that's based in reality and based in issues. Can we just talk about water? Can we talk about education? Can we talk about something other than the lie? That's what I'd love to get back to.
From 2 years ago.
It's kind of, it's like one trick pony sort of thing, right? Remember that Charlie, the talking, the ventriloquist guy?
Oh, yeah.
Charles McCarthy? Charles McCarthy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that act. It's old. It's old. It's old.
It's actually kind of almost become Charlie McCarthyism. That's just bizarre.
Okay.
All right. I don't know how I tied those two together. So your family has been in Arizona for a long time. I mean, hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So obviously you feel very tied to Arizona, have a great love for Arizona. But when did you decide you wanted to serve Arizona in public office? Did you decide to get into politics when you were a Nogales schoolboy, or when did the bug get you?
Funny, that you say that. When I was a schoolboy, on my 9th birthday, my grandfather was elected to be mayor of Nogales, Arizona.
Oh, okay.
And he gave me the best piece of political advice, and I've said this since then. He said, "Listen, mijito, if you ever decide you want to run for office," he says, "understand this: once you announce, half of the people are going to hate you, and the other half won't care." and if you're willing to get into that,
that's not very good for the ego.
No, but I mean, I think that may have been like he was predicting. He says, if you're willing to go up against those odds, he says, and you still want to serve, he says, go ahead. And he told me this right around the time he got elected. So he's telling this 9-year-old kid this. And I've always been a casual observer of politics. And before I ran for county recorder in 2016, I was involved in Democratic Party politics as a precinct committeeman and, served on the executive committee for the state party a little bit in a limited role. So I've been interested, but it was the moment, that I've spoken to so many times when people couldn't vote. Right. When close to 130,000 people in Maricopa County, by some estimates, were denied the right to vote by long lines and bad planning, really is what it was. There was nothing wrong with the system per se. Bad planning and bad communication. I mean, when you have a statewide executive officer telling independents that they can vote in a presidential preference election, and that's just not true, and they show up and they get angry and they clog up the lines, that doesn't have anything to do with the election system. That has to do with bad communication. So I have to distinguish the two because it's important. But Arizona's elections are now really a passion of mine, and I'm growing to learn more about the systems. And so I was always interested, but it never really was like, yeah, let's do it.
Do you feel like you stubbed your toe in some ways on some things when you were county recorder and learned a lesson from that, or? Because you did lose that election to Stephen Richer.
100%. We all make mistakes. And my mistake was that I really focused on the job and I didn't focus on getting reelected. That was my mistake. Okay. If you can call it that. Right? The universe has a way of balancing things out.
But I mean, making mistakes as recorder in regards to elections.
Too. Oh, yeah. Okay. We all make mistakes. There was a couple of missteps. I don't know who
this person is. I've never spoken to a politician that ever accepts responsibility.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's go back to a critical mistake that I made back in the primary in 2018.
Yeah.
We went and hired a company to go out and set up all of our polling places. Right. Remember that? Yep. August of 2018.
Yep.
We hired this company to go up, set up all of these polling places. What we didn't realize was that this company was subcontracting using an app to a bunch of IT technicians. And they could choose whether or not to take the job. And they're supposed to be showing up at 5 o'clock in the morning on election day. We hadn't trained our poll workers to do the setup because we were counting on this company to do the job. Well, guess what? They didn't do the job. And I had to take the hit because it was my decision. I was like, let's get our poll workers the training they need to get their job done. We don't need to burden them with this other stuff. I, at that moment, learned the best lesson that a guy could learn, and that is this. People who work elections really care, and they will learn any system to implement it. They will take on any training to implement it. These are Americans that care, and they want elections to work well. And so into the general, we shifted the training over to our poll workers, our election workers, and that part of it went off without a hitch. Gotcha. So did I make a mistake? I made a bad call. I learned from it, and as it turns out, the 2018 general election pretty much went out without a hitch. Some political opinions happened there, but yeah, that was a hell of a lesson learned, right? It was like, believe in the people that are doing the work, and that was a great lesson, and it has served me well since then.
Well, let's talk for a second about your time in the Marine Corps. What did you learn from that time in the Marine Corps? No, I'm fascinated with this because I never served, but I was an embedded journalist in Iraq and spent a lot of time with the Marines at Al Assad and in some other places. So I've always been fascinated. I couldn't get in when I graduated high school because of my eyes, but I'm fascinated with it. And I wanted to ask you if you agree with something that I read in Congressman Ruben Gallego's book, that there's a strong tradition for Latinos and Hispanics to join the Corps. Yeah,
there is. And I agree with that. There were plenty of folks from Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and all over California, Latinos who were in the Marine Corps with me. There's also a very fierce dedication to the Marine Corps among Native Americans.
Yes, very true.
Particularly tribal nations here in Arizona with the
code
Navajo
talkers.
And other code talkers.
Yeah,
I do definitely agree with that, but I think it has to do with this notion of belonging to a family, right? Family values are very, very strong with Latinos, and that transcends all of the political, right? Strong with Cubans, strong with Mexicans, strong with Venezuelans, et cetera, et cetera. And being a part of a cohesive unit, being a part of something that you can identify with through either the uniform or some moniker later as veteran, blah, blah, blah. That's another thing that we take a lot of pride in, I think, as Latinos. And a lot of people do. It's not exclusive to us. But I think that was one of the aspects that first got me into thinking about service. But if you want to know why I ended up in the Marine Corps, I'll tell you a really quick story.
Sure.
I was working as a counselor at a private high school in West Sedona, Arizona, also known as Cornville. And I went across Mingus Mountain to Prescott, and the recruiting station was there. And I was like, my job was going to be ending. I needed to do something. I needed to get back to school, right? And the GI Bill seemed like a good way to go. And I was just like kind of lost at that point in my life, a young man, late teens, early 20s. And I went to the recruiter station, and they had the sort of the shopping mall type of thing, the Army here, the Navy here, the Air Force here, the Marine Corps. And I went up and I was like looking, and there's the Marine recruiter standing there in his dress blues. And I went to the Army window and I looked in, and there's nobody there. And I went to the Navy, and I turned to the guy and I go, are these guys going to be coming back soon? And he's like, they're out to lunch. Who knows when they'll be back?
Because they're not Marines.
Right? Master Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, Latino. And I said, okay. I said, he goes, so are you planning on enlisting? And I go, yeah, I was thinking about it. And he says, why? And I said, well, I want to continue my education, and I haven't got money for it, but, I'd love to get the training. He goes, well, he says, you can join the Army or you can join the Navy, but you'll never be a Marine. And he hooked me just like that.
Wow.
And to this day, here's the other thing. When I left my job, which included housing, I had about 6 weeks in between. He let me sleep on a cot in his laundry room for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Got me a job at Walmart there in Prescott Valley, unloading horse manure into the garden center,
getting you ready for camp
out of the back of the semi trucks. Wow. There, and that's where I lived for that period of time before I went to boot camp.
Wow!
So it was really great guy. I don't know what happened to him.
Most people hate their recruiters later on. So you had a distinct experience.
You know what? I loved being in the Marine Corps. In fact, towards the end of my enlistment, I got selected for a meritorious commission, which isn't the MESEP program. I didn't have a bachelor's degree at the time. I went through a board and the whole thing, and they're like, on merit, you need to be an officer. So I was going to be a Mustang. I go to Quantico, get stress fractures in both of my feet because these desert paws don't work on ice, and it was like the coldest winter ever there. And so they sent me back, and I ended up just going, finishing my enlistment, and then finishing my bachelor's degree, and then going to law school instead.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I really wanted to. I wanted to make a career out of it.
Did anything in the Marine Corps help you in your public elected official life?
All of it, right? The lesson that I learned earlier: appreciate the people that do the work. right? Get out there into the warehouse. Get out there into the offices where the clerks are actually doing the data entry. Get in there with the troops, because they're the ones that really matter. They're where the rubber meets the road. I was an air wing guy, but we did all of our work in support of the infantry guys, like Ruben, on the ground with the rifle.
Yeah.
We supported the pilots, who then supported the guys with the rifles. But we were also trained as riflemen as well. So we would want that support if we ended up on the ground. And so it was really about teamwork, about that esprit de corps that people hear about. And I really do appreciate it. And, just the discipline of, yes, this job sucks, but it's got to get done, and you got to do it. And so just do it.
Yeah.
Just
Don't
shut
complain.
up.
Yeah.
Don't complain. And I get thanked once every 2 weeks. So, don't give me any accolades. We're just making it happen.
Last question for you. With the passing of Senator Lieberman, does the Democratic Party, we've talked a lot about how the Republicans need some moderation among their ranks.
Yeah.
Do the Democrats need more people like Joe Lieberman, those moderates who are willing to walk across the aisle and do all these other things?
In a way, yes. But what I actually think, if I was going to kind of wave a magic wand and say, here's what the Democrats need to do, Democrats need, in my view, to stop apologizing for their positions. We need to start saying, as Democrats, and I'm not speaking as Secretary of State here, I'm speaking as a Democrat.
Okay.
We need to stop apologizing that our policies are better for families. We need to stop apologizing that we want every human being to be treated with dignity and respect. We need to stop apologizing for the fact that we believe in the rule of law, even if that rule of law works against us in an election, like it did for me. We need to be stronger because we do work for working families. We do work for decent wages. We do work for a better environment. But we tend to be so kind of mushy in our messaging and try to be nice to people all the time. Like, I am far less concerned with someone's feelings than I am with their future and their potential, right? I don't want people just to feel good. I want them to live well, with good jobs, nearby their families, with a decent shot at a good education so they can have solid opportunities. That's what Democrats need to be fighting for. We need to stop apologizing for it. So for me, what Democrats need to do is be more assertive in their messaging, not more aggressive against the other party, not more of a fight against somebody else, but more of a fight for what we believe in. I don't know that that's what Joe Lieberman represented. I was, kind of not paying that much attention back in that phase of my life.
Right.
But, you can work across the aisle with people and be fierce in your beliefs. I do. 5 of the 6 pieces of legislation that we put out there from my office are sponsored by Republicans in this environment.
Right.
And that's because we're asking for common sense stuff, things that are good for business, things that are good for consumers, things that are good for victims of crime. These are the things that I want. And there are people on both sides of the aisle that agree. And it's like Eisenhower said, if we work on the things that we agree on, we're not going to have time to disagree. So is it just like changing parties and compromising just for the sake of looking that good? No. To me, it's stand for your values, find something that you agree with on the other side, and then you can work on it. You can still wear your red jersey, blue jersey. That's okay, right?
Right.
Americans like to fight. And that's okay sometimes.
Yeah.
But we can do it and still be decent. We can do it and still get along.
Yeah.
And we can do it and still get things done for people. And that, to me, is what's most important.
Repeat just real quickly for me. What was it about? I'm more concerned with your future than your feelings. What was that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm much more concerned with your future than your feelings. So some people don't like to compromise. That's okay. But if I can create, for example, a taxation system that's great for business and also provides the services that we need to have solid humanity, that's great for our future. Some people are going to get their feelings hurt. Okay. What's the word? We call each other like snowflakes now and stuff like that.
Yeah.
No, just like it's called compromise, right? It's called maturity.
Right.
Yeah, I don't get everything I want. I'm not a 6-year-old, right?
Right.
It's just like orange-colored foods are not the only foods. We can have a decent diet with a whole bunch of stuff on the table.
Well, I was going to say that I've never thought of you as holding back on your message, because that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about my time ever being on the air or just in a room with you is that you don't hold back. And, sometimes it's peppered with Marine language. But so dare we come up with the term Fontes Democrats? I don't know.
That's a little much.
We'll leave you with that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Adrian, pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks
having
a lot. You bet. Earlier this week, after Kari Lake's legal team asked the court to decide how much she owes Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richer and his defamation lawsuit against her, this was all over claims that she made that Richer manipulated the 2022 gubernatorial election so that she'd lose. Well, Lake continued to say that she was telling the truth. Someone close to Richer told me that if Lake keeps saying this, he'll just sue her again. Lake's claims all along have defied logic. She's essentially saying that Republicans colluded with Democrats to make sure that a Republican lost the 2022 election. Over the last couple of years, Kari Lake, a former Fox 10 news anchor, has told her supporters that she had to get away from working in fake news, reading on air what she now says were lies off a teleprompter. So why do we believe her now? I've worked in media and I've worked in politics, and while I do think a lot of what passes for news is pretty skewed, nobody skews the truth more than politicians. So was Kari Lake's move from news to politics a jump from the frying pan into the fire? The liar pants on fire? Boy, I sound like I'm 12. But thanks to Adrian Fontes for joining us on this week's AZ Political Podcast, the Secretary of State of Arizona. We'll see you next week on the AZ Political Podcast. Thanks for watching.